Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another video with On Point Politics, your number one stop for all things polling and election analysis in the United States. And today we're going to be looking at our combined forecast with Gold Crown Politics for one last time before the general election. Hit the like button and subscribe for more content just like this. And so Gold Crown Politics will be joining us to fill out all of these battleground states. Go ahead and introduce yourself.
Hey guys, Gold Crown Politics here. On Point, thanks for having me on this collaboration. The two of us will be looking at the combined forecast averages for our two election models, and let's get into it.
So, looking at this, we see that Gallup does have a very favorable national environment to the GOP, kind of proving to us that this is going to be sort of an electoral college landslide for the former president. Party identification, very predictive, has Donald Trump up, or at least Republicans are up by 3, but it's always been pretty indicative of the national popular vote, especially the last 3 or 4 elections. They've been pretty spot on when predicting the national popular vote. U.S. satisfaction is at an all-time low. Republicans are ahead on the party better able to handle most important problem. Economic confidence has a minus 28%, some of the lowest we've seen in a while. Republicans up 6 on keeping America prosperous. Presidential job approval is at an all-time low. Republicans are slightly more favorable than Democrats. Republican Party plus 14 on being able to keep America safe from international threats. So all of the fundamentals which have been polled since 1944 by Gallup show a landslide election for the former president as of right now. And looking at the most, accurate pollster, they had a little bit more of a liberal sample in this poll than usual, but we see a R+1 national environment from them. We do differ. We have him winning the popular vote by a little bit more, but clearly the most accurate pollster from 2020 is showing a dramatic shift in the national popular vote for the former president. A lot of these new polls have undecideds a little bit higher than expected, and so that's why you've seen a little bit of a narrowing of the polling here. But as of right now, Joe Biden only at 42% approval rating, not too great for the incumbent. He was at around 46, 47 during the 2022 midterms. And so that's going to be very interesting. And as well, Biden wasn't even on the ballot, but now his administration is on the ballot with Kamala Harris as the candidate. And so we're going to be going into this looking with really accurate pollsters, including Rasmussen Reports has a Trump +3. Richard Barris, the People's Pundit, has a Trump +1. Gallup has a Trump +3 national environment. So all of the accurate indicators basically show us that Donald Trump's going to go on to win the election with pretty great ease. And I'm going to let Gold Crown go ahead and forecast all of the states from our combined averages as of right now.
Looking at some of Kamala Harris' likely states, these would include the state of Washington and Oregon at about 12 points and 9 points for Harris, respectively. We can also put Colorado in that column as well, in the likely column for Kamala Harris. These 3 states, they're very white and very college educated, so I would expect that they would continue their historical leftward trends, especially in Colorado. Certainly these states, they're much closer than they were back in 2020. I mean, they all were, much larger margins for Joe Biden. And now, because of the national environment shift, as On Point was alluding to, these states are going to be much closer than they were 4 years ago. You're going to see a lot of erosion in these states for Harris. And then we can look at Illinois, which is also a likely Democrat margin at about 8 points between our combined forecasts. This state, it's kind of interesting because it has been it's been trending to the right as of recently. Trump is improving with African Americans in the state this cycle, especially in a place like Chicago and the surrounding suburban areas. It also has the highest Muslim population in the entire country. And so I would certainly expect that state perhaps to trend a little bit to the right. But even if it doesn't, even if it's a neutral trend, it would still be a much lesser margin than it was for Joe Biden back in 2020 at 17 points. And then we can take a look at New York and New Jersey, which are 10 points and 6 points for Kamala Harris this election cycle, respectively. These states, they're fairly similar in terms of their demographics. They have a pretty high union electorates, and Trump is improving massively. We saw this with the Teamsters surveys that Trump is improving with these union voters incredibly, just like he did in 2016. I think that Biden back in 2020 kind of recaptured most of that union vote, but it's looking like this cycle that Trump is making massive gains with unions, those blue collar workers, this election cycle. And you can also look at the fact that these two states, New York and New Jersey, are less white than average. They have a decent amount of Hispanics and African Americans in these two states. And so I would expect them to trend pretty heavily to the right, especially New York. And then we can also look at some of Kamala Harris's lean and tilt margins, starting with Minnesota. This is a tilt margin for Kamala Harris, just barely tilting for her between our combined forecasts. Now, On Point and myself, we do differ in terms of our Minnesota prediction. I personally have Harris holding on to the state just barely by about a half point, whereas he has it flipping to Trump into his column by a tilt margin. It's very difficult to be able to call where this state is going to go. I mean, it does have some factors that are pulling it to the left, but also to the right. Unions, Trump's improvement with union voters, as I said, is pretty prevalent in a place like Minnesota. It's why the state got pretty close in 2016. It almost flipped to Trump in only a D+2 national environment against Hillary Clinton. And so this state, it really could go either way. It's really hard to call. We'll have to see what happens tomorrow. I can't believe that election day is tomorrow. We'll have to see if Trump can flip the state and turn it red for the first time since Richard Nixon back in 1972. We can also look at the state of Maine. This is about a half point for Kamala Harris. This state, it's in the tilt column. This state, it is very elastic. The independents here are very swingy voters. They're pretty unpredictable, and so I think regardless of where this state lands, it is going to be very competitive this cycle. It was pretty competitive in 2016, just like Minnesota. And so Trump is looking really competitive in many of these deep blue states. He could potentially flip Maine as well, and then filling out the two states in the Sun Belt of New Mexico, which is a lean margin for Harris, and then the state of Virginia, which is also a lean margin for Harris. Both had about 1.5 point wins each between our two forecasts. New Mexico, I would certainly expect this state to trend perhaps a little bit to the right. It is a very Hispanic heavy state. It's a pretty working class heavy state as well. It's on the border. You do have those white liberals in Albuquerque and the surrounding Democratic city areas. However, I would expect to see the state trend just a little bit right. However, I don't think that Trump has quite enough to flip the state, although it very well could. We could see it get very close, depending on how well Trump really does improve with Hispanics nationwide. And then, Virginia, this is about a 1.5 point lean margin for Harris. It is definitely much closer than the 2020 10 point win for Joe Biden 4 years ago. There's a lot of erosion going on for Democrats in the state. You have Glenn Youngkin with his gubernatorial victory back in 2021. He certainly has been, making an effort to turn the state back to the right, back to its traditional Republican roots, back during the Bush days. But Virginia, this would be a very tough nut to crack. I mean, this state, it's still a very Democratic heavy electorate, and I would expect that Kamala Harris would probably hold on to the state, but it could get very close as it is between our two forecasts. And then we can look at some of the Donald Trump states, starting with the state of Texas, which is a likely 14 point victory for the former president in the state. Now, both On Point and myself, we both have it at pretty much exactly 14 point win. So we both have it in the likely column. And I would certainly expect to see, Trump improve massively with Hispanics in the state. It is a border state, and Democrats have certainly made a big push to continue to push the state to the left. They've put a lot of funding into the state, especially with Colin Allred down ballot. They're more bullish on the down ballot races, perhaps in the Senate, but at the presidential level, this is looking like a blowout victory for Donald Trump in the state at 14 points. And then Florida is just under the safe column at a likely victory for Trump, just under 15 points. Similar to Texas, I would expect Hispanics in Florida to boost Trump heavily in the state, especially in a place like Miami-Dade County, in which Republicans already lead in the early vote. It's looking exceptional for them. And then we can look up north to the two states of Iowa and Ohio, which are both safe margins at over 16 points apiece for the former president. I would certainly expect him to continue his improvements with the white working class in these states. It is notable that white voters as a whole are trending to the left this cycle, at least as what's being indicated in the crosstabs. But I would expect that these two states would be big victories nonetheless. And then we can fill out the congressional districts on the map as well. So Nebraska's second congressional district, this is a tilt margin for Kamala Harris. It is just barely in her column. I would expect that she hold on to this district from 2020. This was a 6.5 point win for Biden back 4 years ago. And despite the fact that it has been redrawn as more Republican, I would expect that it still stay in the Democrat column. And then we can look at Maine's second congressional district. Oh, that's already that's already filled out. We can go to the swing states next. Looking up north to the Rust Belt, the three Rust Belt swing states. These are all in the likely Republican category. Wisconsin at 7 points, Michigan at almost 6 points, and Pennsylvania a 6 point victory for the former president. Similar to Iowa and Ohio, these states are very white working class heavy states. It is notable seeing that white voters could potentially trend to the left this cycle by just a little bit, but because these states, they have pretty heavy union electorates, they're also very working class heavy. I would expect to see that if they do trend, a little bit to the left, it wouldn't be by too much. Trump will still see massive improvements in the rural counties. Those will also be driven with higher turnout as well. And then we can look down to the Sun Belt. We can start with the eastern Sun Belt states first, starting with North Carolina, which is a 9 point victory in the likely column for the former president, and Georgia, which is about a 7.5 point likely victory for Donald Trump. Now, in these two Sun Belt swing states, they do have very high African American electorates, and Trump is improving pretty substantially with that voting bloc. And you can look at the early vote data. Black voters are certainly turning out in lesser numbers than they were in 2020. And to win these two states, Democrats would have to have not only massive efficiency with the African American voting bloc, but also, the volume. That's the huge thing, because especially in Georgia, it's really a turnout election in that state. I mean, if Democrats aren't performing at just super high volume with black voters, they're not going to be able to flip a Georgia again like they did in 2020, and certainly not in North Carolina. That state has not gone red, or sorry, it has not gone blue at the presidential level since Obama's landslide back in 2008. So it's going to be very, very difficult for Democrats to flip these two states. I honestly don't know why Kamala Harris is even putting any resources in them at all. It's looking pretty dire for them in these two states. And then we can finish out the map with Nevada and Arizona, which between our two combined forecasts are an 8 point win in Arizona and a 7 point win in the state of Nevada, both likely margins as well. These states, they're more Hispanic heavy electorates, especially a state like Nevada. I would expect it to trend to the right, given that it is a more working class heavy state. I would certainly expect that in a place like Clark County, Trump will see massive improvements given his no tax on tips promise as a policy promise. That's going to help with service workers in a place like Clark County. And then in a place like Arizona, I think that the border, will probably prevent Arizona from trending to the left. And it is notable here in Arizona that you do have a lot of Hispanics, but they have been slower to shift to the right, certainly not as fast as in a place like Florida, where Hispanics have zoomed off to the right. But in a place like Arizona, I would still expect it to improve with them, not as much as on the east side of the country, but certainly enough to prevent the state from trending to the right. If the trend is going to, be anything at all, it wouldn't be very notable. And that finishes out our combined electoral map forecast. Donald Trump wins the 2024 election with 316 electoral college votes compared to Kamala Harris with 222. And this would be a blowout victory for the former president if it were to happen. Now, the election is tomorrow. We'll have to see what happens, guys. I mean, it is very possible that Trump not only crushes all these swing states by really big likely margins, but also that he's very competitive in these deep blue states, as we saw in places like Minnesota, like New Hampshire, like Maine, and even in a New Mexico or a Virginia. Even Hawaii is even approaching the likely column. I have it at just about 15 points, on point a little bit higher than that, but that just speaks volumes to how much of a pretty much a near landslide this is for the former president. And both of us are very confident in our margins. And so I would expect to see a very similar map like this to happen tomorrow, we'll have to see. But On Point, thanks for having me on. This was a great collaboration. And make sure to go out and vote, guys. This is a very important election. You guys still want to vote, so I don't want to discourage people from voting, even though he's leading by a lot. Go out and vote. This is a very important election, and it's looking like a big Donald Trump win, though. Thanks for having me on Point.
Thank you very much for coming on, and we will see you guys in the next video.